divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And tonight, we are... Listen up, let me tell you a story that you think you've heard before. We know our names and our fame and our faces. Know all about the glories and the disgraces. I'm done, 'cause all this time I put just one word in a stupid rhyme. So I picked up a pen and a microphone. History's about to get overthrown. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. But just for you tonight, we're divorced, beheaded, live.
Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be venturing into the early modern period with a discussion of the musical Six with two returning guests, Tracy Tanoff and Meghan Griffin. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Would you like to both tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to come on to talk about this particular musical?
I'm a big Broadway fan. I live on Long Island, so I'm able to get into it, fairly often. I started hearing about this one, I think, sort of like twofold. A lot of Broadway and West End fandoms are sort of interlinked, so if you're in one, you're in many others. It's kind of funny because you'll be in Facebook fan groups and it's the same 7 people that I interact with across 5 other groups are all here. And so I forget if it was probably the Hadestown group or something, because it's a really active fandom where people really started talking about Six. But I also have friends in the period drama fandom in general that were sort of obviously starting to follow it on the West End, and then when it came to Chicago, so I joined the fan group for it, and it was I think when they were starting up in Chicago, and then they also have cruise line productions of this show, and so it was really starting to blow up internationally. So I sort of crested that wave right before it was gonna hit Broadway. We didn't even know if it was going to transfer to Broadway. So it was mostly just hearing a lot about it from they really have the social media support of a lot of really active teenagers and 20-somethings, and if you can hit that wave it doesn't always translate to financial success because it's young people that don't have a lot of money, but it can be really beneficial, and right. I think that they managed to strike that good balance. So that was how I started hearing about it. I think part of the reason I first shared it in the group was that they were coming to Ireland on tour. So I knew that maybe Ollie would get to see it, or the people that were in the UK would be able to see it. And then it started coming to Chicago, so people like Dawn could go see it. So I'm glad that it's started to become, more accessible, even with everything that's going on in the world right now, that, hopefully everyone will be able to see it and really enjoy it. I'm glad that it's really reaching the level of success that it has, and that we can, talk about it and sort of spread the word a little bit more.
Yeah. As for me, I actually know, my friend Alex told me about it when he was starting to plan his trip up to New York. He comes up every March. And I remember the first time I heard about it, I was kind of insulted by the idea. It was just kind of at this point, I was I love researching. I mean, I watch The Tudors. I've read a ton of books. It's my favorite. I mean, I think it's everybody's favorite weird man and 6 wives. But I just was can you just let them rest in peace? Are we really going to make money off of these 4 women again? And then one of the songs popped up on my Spotify. And Alex tried multiple times explaining it to me, and I was I don't know. And then I finally heard one of the songs and was okay, this is more giving them a voice than it is trying to make money again off the story of a man and his 6 wives. And the music reminded me of my childhood, and I was sold from that point. I mean, it is, if you were a Spice Girls fan, it is exactly what adults you should be listening to. So
yeah, and absolutely. I know that they say that the Anne Boleyn song in particular was inspired by, like, Avril Lavigne.
Yes.
Like, I should find it, there's, like, a breakdown of, like, what, like, pop group and thing inspired, like, each song, and, like, the Anne Boleyn being Avril Lavigne, like, that was, like, when I was 12 or 13, so it's, like, as soon as I heard it, I'm like, fine, I can be into this. But I feel like it's one of those things where, like, when you hear about it, you're either, like, really into it, or, like you said, you're, like, insulted by it, because when I mentioned it to my best friend, I was like, yeah, it's, like, a pop musical based on Henry VIII's wives, and she's like, I have to hear this. She's like, she heard, like, one sentence, and she's like, it sounds amazing. So
I was also just to basically, like, I have to listen to this, and I was initially hoping to actually go see it in Chicago, which is closer to where I am, and then just didn't get around to it because of travel plans that I had that summer while it was going on. And then ended up like making plans to go see it with my parents, and they got tickets. And as it happened, the weekend that they happened to get tickets for out of the like 4 weekends that we were considering, the one that we got it for was March 8th. And that's the only one that we would have actually like were able to see it. If we planned to go any of the other dates that we had as options, it would not have happened. But I was definitely just immediately like, yes, this is my thing.
Yeah, I actually ended up seeing it. I put in for the lottery and saw it March 1st. And hopefully it does reopen because everybody should go see it. It is just a blast.
Yeah.
Put up with your like every single day. But now it's time to and listen when I say you must think that I'm crazy. You wanna replace me, baby? There's no way. If you think for a moment, I'd rate you a moment. Just hold up, there's no way. No way. No way. There's no way. No way. No way. There's no way.
Just a couple of notes about the musical. It's written by Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss. It first premiered at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2017. And as we've kind of referenced, it started in Broadway on previews on February 13th, 2020, and was scheduled to actually open on March 12th, and then didn't. I was not actually going to say a lot about the cast because I don't actually know that much about like theater musical actors, and so they're not people that I'm otherwise super familiar with. But I do just want to note that as I was randomly Googling, I came across the fact that Genesis Linnea, who plays Anne of Cleves on the studio recording, and Amy Atkinson, who is Katherine Howard on the studio recording, are in a relationship now, and that is just an absolute goddamn delight, and I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. I should also mention that Toby Marlowe is non-binary. I don't know how often that like comes up in press that you may have seen, so I just I think they go by they them, so that's like a minor important note.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the queens being in a relationship, I think they went to like London Pride or something together, and people were like freaking out. Like everybody was so happy.
It's just so delightful. I noticed also when reading the program that within the context of the musical, like, you're sort of like presuming that these are like cis-het women because, it's the 16th century and they were all like women who were married to a man. But that the program really emphasizes that like it wanted the musical to feel like it's a space that is that is both racially diverse, but also a space that's like diverse and like welcomes like queer and trans and non-binary people. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier that it sort of reminds me of that, there's this meme that circulates around Christmas time of, somebody that did like a revisionist gingerbread house where it's like the wives like all like lure Henry VIII and they like murder him by candlelight, and like that's sort of what this like show reminds me of, like the spirit of that meme. Like, and so,
yes.
And so like the two of them being in a relationship like sort of reinforces that energy. It's like, yes.
I think most of the cast, at least what I saw, it was their first time on Broadway. This was like is their first show, which I think is really cool.
A lot of them came from Chicago, and I think most of them hadn't made like their Broadway debuts before.
Yeah, and that definitely is one of the things that sucks about the opening is that like they didn't really have that opportunity.
Yeah. I hope they do. I mean,
I hope so too.
The set is really simple, so it feels like one that they can keep and not, I don't know. I just hope it stays.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I've heard fairly positive things about, like, what the forecast is looking like for it staying, because it, like I said, it was making, like, millions of dollars in profit, which is sort of uncommon for a show this new, and I think, they say that it has really good backers, and it obviously has enough, like, international success to, like, have these productions on so many different platforms, so I've heard that the odds are good, but obviously everything could change.
Right. And also related to what we were talking about before, I just want to say how also delightful it is that in the entire thing, there is never a single man or male identifying person on stage.
Yeah, that's really, really, really great. The entire band was female, and not everybody is like stick figure, muscular dancer. I mean, it's like all of them look like they are, are super fit, but it's a different kind of super fit, if that makes sense. Like,
right.
Some of them
like
look
they're
like
not
they could
all
throw
like
a
weepy
punch
or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people feel, like, really happy that it's, like, a pretty, like, body-positive cast, and it's, like, also a really racially diverse cast, in that some of the international casts, like, haven't been as racially diverse, and people aren't always, like, happy about that, because they really do want it to be a space for, like, performers of color and, like we were saying, like, queer and trans and non-binary performers to really be, like, accepted. So the fandom actually is, like, really positive about diversity in that way. Like, they want diverse casting. They want it not to be this cast of, like, 6 white women, like, we're expecting.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, like, important to the fandom that be considered. And I think that's really great. I think the fandom being so, like, young skewing is a really big factor in that, too. And obviously, like, the Hamilton influence of, like, the race-bent, like, gender-bent sort of casting.
Yeah.
So there's also a production of 1776. They just announced that they're going to have all female and queer and trans and, like, non-binary performers next year, and that's performers of color. So that's, like, a really important, like, trend that's kicking off right now.
No, I appreciate that.
It's fantastic.
Yeah,
I am very
and
excited.
it's gonna make people so mad, and it's, like, so great.
It's always fun / horrifying to see people's reactions to everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry about what I said. I'm just trying to have some fun. Don't worry, don't lose your head. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. LOL, say oh well, or go to hell. I'm sorry, not sorry about what I said. Don't lose your head.
I'm going to give Jindy for the enumeratio section just like a very brief recap of the premise, and then I figure we'll just have kind of like general discussion about the musical. So the 6 wives of Henry VIII decide to hold a competition to determine who will be the leader of their pop group based on whoever had to put up with the most bullshit from Henry VIII. They each sing their piece and make their case, but Katherine Parr finally points out that they have been defined by Henry and their relationship to him for far too long. They call off the competition and in the final number imagine their own alternative and happier lives. I just love everything about this soundtrack. Like, I started listening to it shortly before I went to see it, and then basically continued to do so nonstop, including I like listened to it on repeat on the 4-hour drive to Chicago from Bloomington that I took the weekend before. And then have like also been basically doing the same thing since. And I am pretty sure I have like memorized it now. And also recently my neighbor like made some comments on a Facebook post that like, oh, we've been enjoying hearing your singing. And I'm like, oh, I guess you can hear that.
Whoops.
It's also like a relatively short recording too, so I feel like on a 4-hour drive, like you probably listen to it like 40 times, if not like much more. So,
but it's so good.
Yeah, it's so good. But yeah, I think it comes to like maybe like 45 or 50 minutes, something like that. So you listen to it like 6 times-ish on a 4-hour drive.
Yeah, I think the whole show is only like an hour and 20-ish, which is pretty short for Broadway. Like, I think on the West End they do like 3 shows because of it instead of like the typical like 2-show day. That's why another thing that they have that's a little different than the standard Broadway cast is that they have a lot of alternates. Like, I think just because like the show schedule is so demanding that like they have a lot of, like, queens that can fill in for, like, multiple performers, or that, like, step into the roles, you know, a little bit more frequently than, like, your average understudy.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of it is essentially that each wife gets to have her own song where she basically makes her case for why she should win. And I think overall it does a really good job at making all or pretty much all of them, like, seem very compelling. I'll be honest, I still don't like Jane Seymour.
That's, like, it's really funny. That's, like, the song that, like, the fandom at large is kind of, like, on, and it's just, like, a pretty, like, widely held sentiment about Jane Seymour, and I, like, feel sort of bad. It's just, like, it's funny in that way that it's, like, so widespread throughout the fandom.
I like the song, and I think it is performed so well.
Absolutely.
And it is a beautiful song about a woman who, in my opinion, is taking a situation of being abused in some way and, like, trying to show how powerful she is in that.
Yeah.
That being said, I also agree that it's, like, and the show basically says that, like, at every point, it's like, yeah, we get it, you died, but also, like, fuck you, you admitted,
right.
you know.
One of my favorite lines is when she says the only one he really loved, and they all are, like, rude. That's, like, one of my favorite parts.
It's like every time she opens her mouth, I think Anne Boleyn turns around and was like, yeah, but at least you got to keep your head. Or something along those lines.
Yeah, like, especially when you have, like, there's all the banter that's in the show that's not on the soundtrack. It's just, like, very much this low-key, like, everybody hates Jane Seymour.
Yes. And I think they intentionally make it so that she can't dance well, because there's a comment within it about how she dances, and I mean, she's not the best dancer of the group, but also, like, I can't imagine that, like, this woman actually can't dance, because
it had to be
Broadway.
Deliberate in terms of how they do her choreography. But yeah, I cackled in the theater where there's this, like, bit at the end where there's, like, they're being, like, all serious about, like, what this, like, the whole, like, thing that they've been doing tells us about, like, how people think about women. And then everyone's like, and then Katherine Parr is like, and we've all learned, and Anne Boleyn interjects, I think, that Jane can't dance.
Yes. It's so true. It's so true. Jane can't dance. It's fine. It's fine.
I think it's also, like, it's so, like, tonally different from the rest of the show. I think I remember that this singer that she's inspired by is supposed to be, like, Adele. So it's, like, it's really this, like, big, like, Adele-style, like, power ballad, when the rest of them are sort of, like, more, like, pop-focused, like, dancey numbers. So, like, it would make sense that she can't, like, dance to the degree that the rest of them does. It's not that kind of song. But it's, like, my comparison that leaps to mind is, like, there's this, like, Celine Dion-style power ballad in the middle of The Greatest Showman, and it's, like, and it just, like, takes me out of the piece, like, every time, because, like, the rest of the numbers are so, like, pop-focused and dancey, and then there's, like, a Celine Dion opera singer. I'm like, no, this isn't working for me. And it's, like, the same thing. It's, like, smack in the middle of Six. It's, like, let's sing like Adele, and it's, like, not when the rest of it is, like, Avril Lavigne-inspired. So.
Right. I think it works. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that, like, how much I was already in love with the show. Like, the moment it opened, I was bawling. And so emotions were already running and everything. I mean, like, I loved it. There is not a minute of the show that I didn't love. And yes,
agreed.
If you've listened to the soundtrack, you do know all the songs. Like, some of them are kind of broken down a little different because there's banter in the middle, or especially Katherine Parr's song. There's a lot that goes on in the middle of that. But knowing the words, you can just kind of, I don't know, it's a different experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
I think with Heart of Stone too, it's like, as someone who's lost a parent, it's like, it doesn't, like, always, like, super get to me, but at the same time, like, when she really, like, starts saying, like, you know, with her son, like, she'll never see him grow, I'm like, okay, don't think too hard about this song or you'll start crying and, like, you won't stop. And it's like, so it, like, as much as it does sort of, like, drag the show down a little bit, like, it also is, like, a really powerful, like, emotional song in that way.
Yeah, I do actually, I actually like the song. I think it's a beautiful song. It just, like, is the one that, like, it just hasn't quite, like, made me like Jane Seymour more.
Jane Seymour's just never been the wife that I cared about.
That's what it really is for me, is that it's, like, this is a beautiful song, and, like, it really does the way in which it's, like, this, like, I don't know, like, it really expresses, like, the things that are sad about her life, but on the other hand, it's like, but at least you got to keep your head, though, and also you're kind of, in part, at fault for Anne, like, not keeping her head, so, like,
Yeah. Like, if she had lived through childbirth, the other 3 wives probably wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The other thing, by the way, that changes is that from the soundtrack to the production is that there's a couple of just like little things here and there where they adjust the lyrics to make more sense for an American audience.
yes.
Oh, okay.
With like the one that I noticed most being that in Katherine Howard's song, there's like a bit where she says like just mates, no chemistry, and they have to like adjust it so it says friends instead of mates because like we don't use mates in that
I heard
way in
about
America.
that.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember, I mean, like, if you don't know British idioms at this point, I mean, like, why? I just, of any group, Broadway people they're going to know what mate means at the least.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I
I found
think
it jarring, but that was just
Yeah.
'cause, like I've listened to the soundtrack for so many times, so I'm not sure I would have noticed if I hadn't.
I think I heard that they don't use like British accents on like Broadway in Chicago. I think
No,
they
which
say-
I was fine
yeah.
with. Like, I don't want
Yeah.
anybody faking a British accent if you can, you know.
I feel like singing and trying to put on an accent, like I'm sure people have done
Yeah.
it, but it must just be so hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that like
I don't know if you want to talk about, like, each wife in order, or, like, because we're talking about Katherine Parr, do you want to talk about Katherine Parr, or?
yeah, we don't
I
have to
got a
go
lot
in
to say
order.
about her song. Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to go in order. Everybody knows what the order is.
That song is one of my favorite on, like, I mean, I love every song on the album, but actually seeing it in person, it kind of hit me as to how dark of a song. Like, I knew it was dark because
Yeah.
Katherine
Which one
Parr,
is this?
Katherine
Oh, okay.
Howard.
Katherine
I'm sorry,
Howard.
Katherine Howard.
Yeah. Okay.
Who was basically the definition of groomed from childhood, and
Yeah.
was killed for the reasons that she was groomed for. And there was something about watching it on stage, because the song on the album doesn't quite hit this note of like realizing
Yeah.
and the despair, and like watching. It was Samantha Pauly, when I went, she like just captured this despair of like, fuck, this is my life and this sucks
Yeah.
so much. And
Yeah.
it was such a good take on it. I don't know, it just had a very different feel than the album. It was the one song that I was like, okay, I knew the song from the album. This is not ever how I felt listening to it. Like, very uncomfortable in a good
Yeah.
way.
That was something that the fandom in the Facebook group that I'm in talked about a lot, because a lot of people are like me in that they've only, heard the album, especially before it came to Chicago and Broadway. And I know that someone was starting to, I think, like, sort of being defensive and saying, like, they felt that the song was, I guess, like, in their mind, it was sort of almost like victim blaming her. And they were saying that, like, it was painting it in too weird a way. And then someone said, like, no, when you see it, like, the choreography in particular, like, highlights like the
Yes.
moments where she
Yeah, it
realizes
really
that
does.
it, like, definitely, like, wasn't consensual, and, like, she's thinking back about it. And it's like, I
Yeah.
think the moment that it really hits me on the album is like when she's going through like the repeated themes of like every man telling her the same thing, and she's like, oh, like, it's
Yeah.
gonna be different, it's gonna be different, and she's like, no, I guess it's not. Like, it's really sad, but it's not sad in like an obvious
Yeah.
way. I feel like you really have to like think about it, and then like it starts like becoming really upsetting, especially when you think about like how young she was. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So-
Right.
Yeah.
And that was really something that I always found really powerful listening to the album, even that, like, especially that line where she says, it's like, why did I think it would be different? It's never, ever different.
Yeah.
And that, like, I think that, like, as the song kind of makes that transition to her realizing how much all of her relationships have been abuse, essentially, is, like, just, I think it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like being in the Facebook groups too is sometimes really terrible, because like I said, there's like younger teenagers there, and there's some like sexual innuendos in that song that like some of the younger listeners like didn't quite grasp. Like there's the C to D one. Like there was definitely like a 14-year-old one day that was like asking about that, and we were like, nope, like we don't have to talk about that.
Nope,
like,
you
so
need to go
it's
ask
like,
your
Right. The, like, he even let me use his favorite quill, and then the, like, my wrist was so tired. It's like, okay.
Yes, every line of that song until the shift
filthy.
into like, fuck, this is my life, is such a good innuendo. It like the first time I listened, I
Yeah.
just remember laughing the whole time. I loved it. And then you listen the second time, and you're like, oh.
like, this is actually really upsetting.
Yeah.
Never mind.
And then you're like, how old was she when she
Yeah.
died? Oh, she was 17. Oh.
Yep. Yeah, like that's definitely the song that for me I feel like has like the most like in some ways emotional range, that like it really like goes from being this fun song to by the end being this song about like how actually horrific this all is. And it just like really hit me, and like in a big way when I was even first listening to it.
I think especially because like her introduction is like so bouncy. Like when she comes in, she says, "I think we can all agree I'm the 10 amongst these threes."
Yes.
And like she really like puts herself forward in this really like self-confident, like fun way. And then when it really like crumbles towards the end, like it's really upsetting.
Yeah.
And she's 17.
Yeah. I don't think I really knew that until you said, and now I'm like, oh.
Yeah. No, what I really like about the program, and I ran and grabbed mine, I don't actually keep programs, but this is one of the few I did, is that, like, they do tell you about each of the wives, and also, like, the inspiration for each song.
Yeah.
And, like, what the cause of death was and how old they were and everything, and it's just really cool.
Yeah.
Like, to really put it in there, like, she was fucking 17.
Yeah, I think especially, like, with the show reaching a younger audience, like, that it's, like, really important to do that. And especially because one of the things I really like that the show points out is when they say, we've been just one word in this stupid rhyme. And, like, and it really made me think about how, like, they're right. Like, I knew the rhyme, but I really didn't know, like, the individual circumstances of really any of them besides Aragon and Boleyn, who sort of have like the other Boleyn girl and like the like, which is I know like total trash, but like that sort of like that sort of like get focused on in like adaptations that like I saw when I was young, and so like I knew about them, but I didn't really know about like anything else beyond that. And when it like really made it sink in that like they're right, we've reduced these women to like nothing, and there's so much that we don't know about them and it doesn't get taught. Like I feel like it's a good thing that they're really doing that, and they're sort of taking on that responsibility for a younger audience. I know people feel like some people feel that because it's just one song for a wife, like it does kind of reduce them down to like one characteristic or like one significant point, and some people feel like it doesn't really go into it enough. I know that when they wrote the show, I think they said that they were like procrastinating on like some of their exams like for college, and I think that they said that they had read like one biography when they wrote it, so like maybe not every detail is like super accurate. But at the same time, like I don't think they were setting out to write like Hamilton, like a really comprehensive like autobiographical show. Like they were just doing something fun. So like I'm not gonna hold it to the same standard. And I think that a lot of people like after seeing it are going to like do their own research and know that like this isn't meant to be like super accurate historical show.
No, I think that's what I really, really like about it is the fact that, like you, I mean, everybody knows about Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn because it changed history so much. But listening and figuring out how much I love Katherine Parr's song, and then going and like looking up Katherine Parr and seeing like how fucking badass Katherine Parr is, who's like and Anna of Cleves, who basically her whole part of the show was like, you know what, I don't need to be a part of this. My life is great. It's really I think it is, like you said, it's not meant to be something that we're looking at with like the tweezers or like looking under a lens of historical, but it's like a jumping off point of like, hey, the rest of these women had something to contribute, and it's really, really cool that they're finally getting some kind of say.
Yeah, and like they definitely do have to simplify to some extent, but like I think for the most part the way they do that works given the way the structure and the narrative like is created, that like to some extent like you can't say everything. I'll mention a little bit later some things like I kind of wish that they'd come up, but like I understand that they didn't.
I think especially because like the format of the show is like the wives trying to give their history in like a really condensed way, like you can't argue with them too much for like condensing it down, like they have to. So like it's built into the premise.
Yeah, and on Anne of Cleves also, I have always actually, I mean, obviously I am particularly nerdy about this stuff, given that this is my podcast and also that I have a PhD in history. But I actually had a brief period in my life where I was writing a historical novel about Anne of Cleves that I did not finish because I was like, she's the one that like nobody's written about, so I'm gonna do it. Yeah.
I would I think you should do this. Go for it. This is the time, especially.
I need to.
Yeah, if you
I
still
need
have
to
access
do
to
it.
finish.
Yeah, no, I need to like actually
Especially
would like to
same
do this
spirit.
at some point. Yeah, and especially now that I feel like I have this like real like feeling of connection to Anne of Cleves, that this musical really hit home for me, that I did not have when I first started writing this historical novel and was like 18. But now as a very happily divorced person, this song is just like such a like anthem for how great it is to be divorced and like out of a not great marriage.
Yeah.
And that she's just like, I'm single and like there's no man to tell me what to do, and it's amazing. And I just like love her so much.
So great. I love that she gets the costume chain.
Yes. And I actually like, so they were selling as some of their merch tote bags that had each of the like last names such as they are of the wives, and then like and then like their number, and they're in kind of like athletic jersey style. And it was like really like, because this song especially worked for me was how I made the difficult decision in terms of like, I was like, I can only afford to buy one, and that's how I made the difficult decision to go with Anne of Cleves as opposed to Anne Boleyn.
Yes.
Yeah. I think this song too is one of my favorite ways that they sort of like made it relatable for a modern audience, because like for me, you know, I can't relate to like the divorce side of it, but I think the you said that I tricked you because I didn't look like my profile picture. I love that lyric so much. And you know, especially like looking into it and like finding out the history a little more, it's just like it works so well. And like the like sort of for me it resonates because of like the insecurities about like body image and like online dating, because I was always someone that, you know, has always been like really insecure about the prospect of online dating, because I'm like, I hate that it's so like image focused and it's like it's only based on like physical attraction, and like it really bothers me in that way. So I really like how the song sort of like taps into that and really like makes it an anthem. Like when she says like, you know, I'm gonna hang it up for like everyone to see, like fuck you if you don't like it. Like I really love the way that it sort of like makes that like the mood of the piece, and you know, and it's like her whole like attitude. I think that's great.
And it for me very much also like it does a really good job of like walking the line between, obviously like it talks about that because that's like the main thing that most people know about her if they know anything, but also like doesn't entirely like give it, like it doesn't like give credence to Henry's claim that she was misrepresented in a way that like a lot of things do, which I think is like very important, because like if you actually look at the kind of history of what happened, like basically he like did this thing where he was like, I'm gonna wander in and like pretend that I am not the king, and then like she's gonna be super attracted to me immediately, and then she wasn't, because he was this like dude old enough to be her father. And and then like I think there's like a pretty good argument that he basically like said like, oh no, she's ugly, as his way of basically like saving face, because he was embarrassed about the fact that she was like not into him when she didn't know who he was. So I like, it doesn't get into all of that detail, but I think like the song does a good job of like having her have this kind of like, I mean, just like fuck you though vibe.
I think it's incredibly appropriate, and it's again, the costume change is amazing in the middle of it, and just the whole like, I mean, everybody's like, this sounds like it's so great, and she's like, you know what, it kind of is, and it's, you know,
like, I guess I'm not gonna win this competition, but that's fine. I'm just gonna go back to my palace. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and going on what you said about Henry, you know, being in disguise, like, I guess it's kind of like, because he kind of did that to so many wives. Like, that was a thing for him. Like, he wanted to be loved for him and super blah, blah, blah. But it was like, no, my dude.
And it was also like shit that he did at court. Like, it was shit he did at court that like he could pull off when he was like in his 20s and was like legit sexy in like his like 20s, early 30s. And then he's like, no, I'm going to do this now. And she's like immediately going to be turned on by me. And it's like, no, to the extent that like you can still pull this off at court now, it's because like everybody actually knows it's you, even though you're wearing a fucking mask.
Yeah. Because like, I think by that point he had gout and was probably like 200 pounds overweight. Like,
Like,
Yeah.
you know, we've all seen the
You mean
the
he-
portraits of Henry VIII. Like, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he's not most people's type necessarily.
No. I mean,
You mean-
he's also an
you
awful
mean he-
person. Like, he's just a terror. Like,
That
it's
too.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean he didn't look like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers?
No, he doesn't
Oh,
look like
no.
Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. It's very disappointing.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure the vibe is basically like, who is this like gross old man hitting on me?
Yeah.
Like, I also just on the, Tracy, what you were mentioning in terms of like online dating, I think it's really interesting in the staging with the House of Holbein song that actually really like hammers that
Yes.
in more, that there's this, this kind of bit that they do where they have like people standing and then they like kind of stage a like swipe left, swipe right thing with the like various people who
okay.
were candidates to marry Henry.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a very cool. That song is really great. If you haven't listened, it's basically about the horrors of beauty back then and like what they
Oh my
did
God, yeah.
to, you know, for makeup and like high heels were and all that other stuff. And it really, like, the first time I listened to it, I was like, this is fun. And then there was a line that I finally picked up on. Oh, I can't even remember which one it was. Oh, the 9-inch waist or something like that. And I was like,
Yeah.
wait a second, that's dangerous. And then I finally like sat down and listened to the lyrics and was like, oh, all of this is horrible. And it's in this like very Euro rave vibe. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
When I go to the Strand in the city, they keep their like art books are sort of like on one of the landings, and every time I pass it now, like there is like a like Holbein like art book that's like just on the landing, and every time I pass it I'm like laughing because I keep thinking of the song.
I'm gonna have to go find that now.
My dad is very fond of Holbein and was like very like into the House of Holbein like Euro pop song.
No. Oh, okay.
He was very on board. He was like, I really like the whole, he really liked the Holbein song. He said that was his favorite.
That's awesome.
I feel like that's another risk, like what Meg was saying. I feel like he could either like hear it and be like horribly offended, or like just go with the joke, and I'm glad he like went with the joke.
I know, right? And I will say, actually, as I was leaving, so I mean, the comment that I made earlier about like how great it was that there are no men on stage, I made like mostly, I went with my parents and I made like with my mom, like to my mom as I was walking out, and this guy who I did not know, but who was like sitting next to me turned around and he was like, I like that too.
Good for
Like,
him.
very
I was like, oh
genuinely.
god,
I'm
this
like,
could
good
go
for you.
somewhere else. Oh.
No, it was like very nice. I mean, you know, I have a feeling it's kind of a self-selecting audience to some extent. And I will say it was actually when I went, it was like
Yeah.
it was in fact a predominantly female audience.
It is, yeah. It was for sure.
That was like one of the last things I saw on Broadway before the closure was The Inheritance, and like both times I was definitely sitting like just surrounded by like gay male couples, like because it is like a
Yeah.
play about gay men, and I was looking around, I was like, yep, this is pretty much the audience of this play, and I'm
Yep.
like, I'm just like a queer woman sitting being like, hey, like I'm single and I'm just like with this like gay men having a good time, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of, oh my god, can I tell you? Okay, so I entered the lottery and ended up winning tickets, and I sat in, what are they called on the side? I cannot remember.
the boxes.
The boxes, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Oh, nice.
I was on stage left, so Katherine of Aragon is like constantly in my sight, and I cannot express how much I fell in love with the actress. Like,
Oh my god.
my crush, just the entire, like, I mean, she was gorgeous, and the, like, I can't explain it all. Like, I now follow her on Instagram, I'm not gonna lie. It's such, but I was like, oh my god, I'm so in love, and, like, I have to look at the rest of the show, but also, like, god damn. It was so wonderful.
Yeah. And her costume is amazing. So she's like, Beyonce is
Yes.
the inspiration for
Yes.
her, and she very much like has like, she just like, her song is very like badass and like just this like real fucking stubborn, which I really enjoyed and
Yes.
appreciated.
Yeah, she was played by a Filipino, oh, I cannot remember what she, but it was so great. Like, it was not the
Yeah.
normal Katherine of Aragon cast, but I like,
Yeah.
like you said, they basically all learn each other's parts, and it was, you could tell it was one of her first times on Broadway stage, like how much energy and how excited she just felt.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And it made that song even better.
Yeah, and like she also is just like very much, I thought, and I think this is like true, like listen in terms of like the person who plays her in the studio recording. So in terms of like listening to, I got that, but like she just like very much like gives off this vibe where it's like you can tell that she is like the person who is like really descended of royalty here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like her whole vibe is just basically like, I have done fucking everything, like married 2 men sight unseen basically, because no, she didn't marry the brother, I don't remember.
Yeah, she did marry the brother.
I never quite understood what happened with the brother.
So
yes,
she married him,
okay.
and then he died, no, the marriage was never annulled. He just died, and she stated that the marriage was never consummated because he was like kind of sickly for the entirety of it.
Okay,
but like
so,
she
like,
married him at 15,
Henry then
and
married
then
her,
Henry
and
VIII
like,
at 23. That's a lot of time between 15 and 23. I don't know. I believe her, hands down. She
they
says
like
it didn't
they like
happen,
kept
it
her
didn't
at
happen,
court.
but...
So they kept her at court, and basically like Henry's father, Henry VII, was like kind of so-so on whether he thought marrying her then in turn to Henry, like in turn to his second son, was like a good idea or not. And so they just basically like kept like stalling and like kind of fucked with her for several years.
Oh,
yeah.
Which
Wonderful.
is not great. Yeah, no, so like,
No,
and she
that
actually
was so
like
much
really
shit.
is somebody that like, she had a rough life, like in terms of like, that was like a rough start. And then like she, you know, had like a number of miscarriages and like was facing increasing like pressure over the fact that she had not produced a son. And then like, you know, I mean, everything was like super shitty in terms of that, like essentially as a way of like punishing her, Henry then like prevented her from seeing her daughter, and the whole thing was like super gross, and he's terrible.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that stands out to me about that song too, is the daughters are so easy to forget, and like, you know, that you saying like, oh, I'm gonna like, we're gonna be childless, but it's like, you know, do you not remember, like, you know, you were there when I gave birth to our daughter. And like that really stands out to me a lot. And I think the way that they sort of play her in a lot of ways, like sort of like almost like the comparison that's leaping to mind is like sort of like a Hillary Clinton type, or like The Good Wife, where like, you know, she's had to stand by like while all these scandals are happening, and while there's like all this talk about, you know, what Henry is doing, and she's saying like, I have stood by through so much, and you're like throwing it all away, and, you know, trying to make me say like, oh, it's my fault, or, you know, like that you're not doing what you're doing. And I think that that's like part of what makes the song really powerful. And like you said, there's such like dignity and poise to what she's saying, and I think that that's like what really stands out about her song for me.
Yeah. And also that, I mean, the fact that like Beyonce is like the main inspiration for her song. Like Beyonce also is somebody who like had her husband cheat on her, and like has like remained with him, and basically like has been like kind of, I guess, like, you know, pop culture is like not actually a thing that I know much about, but like my understanding is that she's basically like kind of like musically snarky about it on occasion, but like she hasn't left him, right?
Right. As far as I know, she hasn't. Yeah.
And she also had like a lot of fertility struggles, I know. I think that was, there was like a documentary about her on HBO, and I think that was like a big focus too.
Yeah, so it's actually like a really, like that's the one in particular where I feel like there's like a really interesting parallel between those real people.
Yeah.
Which otherwise isn't, because we fortunately are not like beheading people to the same extent.
Well, we may need to reconsider that stance, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
I love the Anne Boleyn too. It's like, some people feel that her song makes her a little bit too much of a ditz, but that's another one where I really love like the modern parallels that they draw, like when they say like your comment went viral, and she's like, you know, about, and things like that. I meant to ask you, Sarah, is that based on like any remark in particular that she really made, or is it just like a sort of just like a thing that they threw in there?
She definitely did. I think the specific remark, so was that the one about Katherine, the one about Henry? I'm trying to...
I think the one about Katherine,
Yeah, so she definitely did, like, make some, like, not especially nice comments, I believe, about Katherine, and it is the case that, like, it certainly does seem to have been the case that, like, there's a line like, wow, way to make the country hate you. That's actually like pretty legit, that basically really like popularly people like took Katherine's side pretty dramatically over Anne's, and so like she was perceived very negatively.
Yeah, I like Anne Boleyn's song, but I do fall into the camp of like, I think, at least everything that I've read about Anne Boleyn, she had a big part in it and was a crafty woman, and I think that the song, while it does modernize, and I really do agree, I like the modernization, it does kind of take the blame off of her a little bit, like in a way that was like, Anne was responsible for a lot of what she did, and for, you know, the detriment being that she lost her head. But, you know, I don't know, I do like the song, and I really love her costume. It's probably my favorite costume.
The costume is great.
There are people on like Etsy that make like shirts with just like individual lines instead of like the official show merch, and I've like been debating for months, like, I just want a shirt that says "Everybody chill, it's totes God's will." I'm like I'm not a religious person. I'm like, it would be such a weird thing to wear, but like, it's such a good line, and I find it hilarious.
I totally
say it on a t-shirt.
It has made it into rotation. I've said it so many times.
100%. But yeah, no, and I think it definitely is that, like, I mean, and that's the thing too, is that I think actually one of the things that I actually like about her is that I think she is like extreme, like the real Anne Boleyn was like extremely intelligent and conniving and like a plotter.
Yeah.
And I think the song like loses that somewhat, and I like the modernization aspect, but I kind of wish they hadn't like lost that like plotter aspect of her personality.
Yeah,
like she went to court in France and was educated and everything, and but I get it's also really kind of hard to keep that Avril Lavigne vibe and also make her the intelligent. God, that sounds like an insult to Avril Lavigne, which I am not trying to do.
It sort of like reminds me in certain ways, now that I think about it, of the situation that's happening with Britney Spears right now, where like everybody's been saying like Britney Spears has like, you know, really been like speaking up about like redistributing wealth and everything, and you know, people are like, oh my god, that's so crazy, like Britney Spears is the voice of the revolution. But then people really pointed out that she's been under a conservatorship of her parents for like a really long time, and like she doesn't control like her money, she doesn't control like seeing her kids, and it's like, you know, she's someone that like we think of as like this ditz, but she's like actually really like smart and like, you know, knows what's going on and is unfortunately in like a really terrible situation. So like I think it's like, it's sort of interesting now that you say that. It's like, it sounds like an insult to like Avril Lavigne, but also like we know as people, like these people really have like nuanced images that we might not necessarily like get from what we think of their public image. So,
and Anne Boleyn was all about her image, and probably did put front a face that was not conniving and as educated as she actually probably was. So you're right,
And there actually is an interesting thing that they do with that in the show, where this is not in the soundtrack, but at the end there's this bit where, so like Katherine Parr is trying to make this argument about the fact that this competition between women and comparing of women and categorization of women is inherently a problem. And like makes a like very intelligent comment like to that effect, essentially like concisely explaining some of the things Catherine's trying to say. And they all sort of look at her and she goes, "What? I read."
I forgot about that. That is a great part. I do love that part.
Yeah. One of the things that I do really like about Hamilton is the fact that almost all of the show is on the studio recording. And that's very much not the case for this show. And on the one hand, like, that definitely like added a lot of fun moments for me when I was going to, like, when I did get to see it, of like all of these things that I hadn't quite actually realized even were in the show. But that it does mean that there is like definitely like parts of the narrative and the characterization that gets lost because it's like in these bits that are in the like between song banter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how you get people to go see it.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's like, it is something that, it's something that you risk with like a lot of Broadway shows that aren't like totally sung through, like Hamilton. Like that's the thing. Like Cabaret is one that always has that issue for me, because like there's so much in Cabaret, like so much social context and like things that go on that I'm like, but you need to see the stage show for it to like really have an impact.
Right.
And it's like, it's horrible. It's like the bad thing about being a musical theater fan. It's like, no, but there's so much more in the show, I promise.
Yeah. And it's definitely a struggle, because on the one hand, like, people should be going to see the shows, but on the other hand, for a lot of people, due to, you know, money or geographical location or some combination of the two or other issues, like, you can't necessarily see the show, or you certainly can't see all the shows. And it's a difficult decision, I think, in terms of, like, how you're doing studio recordings, in terms of, like, how you strike that balance of what you include and what you don't.
Yeah. I think we've talked about everybody but Katherine Parr's song, really.
Yeah, so we should talk more about Katherine Parr.
Appropriate. So we saved the best for last.
We did. I have to say, that song makes, like, I cannot listen to it without just breaking down into tears. I know. From the moment, it's my favorite song. Katherine Parr is now my favorite queen, which I know you're not supposed to pick favorites, but she is. But it's the moment where she's just like, I quit, I'm out. And it's, her entire song is about how she's in love with someone else, but, like, for her own security, and because she doesn't have a choice, like, when the king picks you, you have to say yes. And and then like, what she wants to say is no, and I don't need your love, and like, I want to be able to survive on my own. And it's just like you said, how Anne of Cleves is, like, very great divorce song. Katherine Parr's song, for me, just, like, I don't want to say reinforces, like, my, for the most part, decision to be single and independent, but it, like, it helps. Yeah. There's something about it, even though she's in love with someone else and entirely wants to be with him, which I also get that, but it's a powerful song that's just like, I need to make my way in this world myself, and why can't that be what defines me? And I just, every time, I could just break into tears. It's so good.
Yeah, I think, like, the thing that stands out about her song to me is just that, you know, the emphasis towards the end, as she says, like, there's so much more to my story than, like, the men that have sort of come to define me. And she's saying, like, you know, one of her lines is, like, remember that I was a writer, like, I stood up for female education, like, there's so much about her that, like, we don't learn about, and that, you know, we should be defining her by, instead of, like, who she married. And that's, like, something that really stands out about her song to me. And then the emotional moment for me is, like, the 6, where, like, they're saying, you know, when they have, like, those, like, imagined alternative lives, and they're saying, like, they just, like, need each other, and, like, you know, they're saying, like, we're one of a kind, and I'm, like, I'll be, like, singing along in the shower and be, like, crying. I'm like, yeah, you are.
I know.
And that's, I kind of almost wish it was 2 separate songs, because there is a big break in between where she's talking about, you know, this is what I want to be defined by, and then it's, like, this moment of, like, we need to stop defining ourselves by the men that we marry. And because who knows how many women have been lost to history, because all that was written was what, you know, what man they married, or they probably didn't marry, or, you know, lived with a friend. But, and then it's, you know, this whole, and it's kind of like the moment where you realize all of this is a setup to lead to that song, or that part of the song of stop fighting, basically. Like, they're like, this is literally them still fighting over a man, and then that is so pointless.
Have you seen that meme of the 2 women that are in bed, and they're obviously having sex, and it's like, there's no clue what these 2 women in bed together were doing.
Yes. Oh my god, it's just like, oh my god, like, this is such a common problem. I will say also, as a historian, that, like, so, and I think it's, like, interesting that, like, it mentions that, like, we're just, like, one word in a stupid rhyme, that the problem is, it's part sources, but a big part of the problem isn't that you can't know anything about them and that you can't write anything about them. It's that for generations, historians are, like, white dudes who think the only thing that's interesting are powerful white dudes. And so they're not telling these stories. And, like, increasingly, like, there is a, like, especially for these women who are powerful and wealthy and educated, we have a decent amount of sources that, like, we really can tell their stories. And, like, in terms of, like, the work that I do, like, we even can tell the stories of women who are a lot less powerful and important in a pretty significant way. Like, there are certain individuals that essentially, like, in part because of the accidents of history, like, we have a lot of documentation about. And so that is definitely one of the things that I think really, like, comes up here, is that, like, in the show throughout, is that they have also suffered from essentially the fact that, like, historians have made choices about what they think matters, and they have made the decision that, like, these women don't.
Yeah, there's a point where I think it is Katherine Parr that's like, do you know who Henry VII's wife is, and everybody's like, Henry VI, and then there is one point where I think it actually is Anne Boleyn who's like, oh yeah, I know that one. And
and I'm definitely also sitting in the audience being like, yes, it's Elizabeth of York.
But it is, they're literally like, I don't know who prior to the current queen, I honestly probably couldn't tell you who was king, much less who they were married to or anything like that, because one, I don't care. The reason that we know these 6 is because of the drama. And I don't know, it's, again, like, I wanted nothing to do with the show because I thought it was a way of exploiting these women again. And I'm just so glad that it goes in completely the opposite direction of, reminding us of all the women that we've forgotten.
Yeah, I'm glad that in a way the past few years there's really been a trend towards, different sorts of things. Like one thing I'm thinking about right now is Gentleman Jack on HBO is a biography of Anne Lister, who is this really powerful lesbian landowner in the 1800s in England. And that's like a show that's really meant a lot to people, and especially to queer women, because, they're getting, like, for a lot of people, the comparison is like, it's like a Jane Austen love story, but like for women who love women, and that's like not something that a lot of, lesbians or bisexual women have like ever really gotten before. And it's like seeing the reactions to that is like so powerful and meaningful. And, it is a woman that actually existed, and she wrote so many diary entries, and we have these like copious written records of her. She wrote like millions of words over her lifetime, and it's something that you can't deny and say was fake. And there's, so many like archives, and there are so many people that, want to deny that this history exists. And the fact that, we're really bringing it to light, it has like this big budget like television production, like that really matters, and it's making a difference in, what gets shown and, what is like presented on screen or on stage. And I think that that's like a really important thing that's happening right now.
Queer people exist.
Yeah. And just like another comment on some of the kind of issues with like depictions of queens. One trend that I have noticed in more than one movie that I have covered for this is that there's individuals that I know what their names are because they're real people, and I know that they have names and what those names are, but they are never named in the film.
Yeah.
And so like the extent to which like queens, like as I said, even like the most powerful women in a lot of media produced in the 20th and 21st century are robbed of even having a name, much less meaningfully having their own story, is like very disturbing. And I really like this musical as a commentary on that.
Yeah, I always think about, I think it was like your Braveheart episode where that happened a lot, like where you were saying like there were like multiple like nameless women in that movie, and you were like, no, like these were actually like really important like badass women, and like you just know who they are because like you know who they are, and that's like sad. So.
Yeah. Because that was the one that like I was watching with Ollie, and so I kept being like, oh, Isabella, and he's like, who the hell is Isabella? Because it never says her name. And I'm like, Isabella, the she-wolf of France, she's going to murder her husband, she's great. But they just like never actually say her name, and it's like, she's so much, like honestly, like I think she's cooler than William Wallace. Like, why don't we have her story?
I agree. That sounds like an amazing story. I would go see that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think we're starting to get there, especially with more like female directors and people putting like, I think like even like not even a female director, but like something like The Favorite, I feel like is probably like a big step in that direction too, just because it's about a monarchy, but it was so like female focused and especially like queer women focused that I think that that was also like a major step in that direction.
Yeah,
all for it, all here for it.
100%. So I think that's pretty much everything to particularly say about musical itself before kind of moving to some of the like historical.
I just want to say one more thing. Like if you haven't seen their costumes, go look at their costumes, and the fact that these people are doing things on those heels, I'm just it's fucking amazing.
I know. I have really amazing. Awesome. Yeah, I have amazing cosplayer friends whose like talents I envy. And they, you know, made like, you know, outfits when we were at Broadway Con, and they, you know, and these like outfits, they are such a pain in the ass to make. Like I can't even imagine what they're going through.
Oh,
But
yeah.
like my poor friends, but like the costumes are like so beautifully detailed and so distinctive, and they're amazing, you know, like women and, you know, and people in the fandom that are just like breaking their fingers making these things, but they're so beautiful every time.
So beautiful.
They're so great.
You can build me up, you can tear me down, you can try but I'm unbreakable. You can do your best, but I'll stand the test. You'll find that I'm unshakable. When the fire's burned, when the wind has blown, when the water's dried, you'll still find stone. My heart of stone.
For the next section, the Vera et Falso section, I wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the things that it got right and wrong. I will say, like, a lot of the anachronisms and oversimplifications are things that I think are definitely, like, deliberate to some extent, but there's, like, a couple of things that I want to mention here and there. In terms of things that I think they did really well that kind of touched on historical realities, I really like that, especially in the banter between songs and even in the choreography, it really highlights that, I mean, so there's this like kind of rivalry aspect in general, but it really actually does play up in particular the like bad blood between that Anne Boleyn has with both Katherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour. And I think that that actually is like done very well in a way that does kind of like subtly hint at the fact that like those are actually the like real bad relationships that existed in the past, that like they knew each other and did not like each other. And like I think that's good. I also, like I was saying before, that Katherine of Aragon's song very much like hits home the like she is like real royalty. And she actually is the only one of Henry VIII's wives who is actually born royalty, that she is born the daughter of the Queen of Castile and the King of Aragon. So she is in fact like born to like two people who are like individual reigning monarchs, and whose marriage unifies Spain more or less, or like creates Spain as a meaningful country. And like her mother is somebody who, like, I will say also is not my favorite individual, because like she, among other things, is a person who's like very clearly like very much responsible for like creating the Spanish Inquisition and expelling the Jews from Spain.
Okay.
So I have a big problem with the things that are very like rah-rah feminist about Isabella of Castile that kind of ignore that aspect. But she certainly is nothing if not like a very forceful individual, and I think like you kind of see that in Katherine as well. And I think the show like does a good job of portraying that. Oh, there are also a couple of comments that are made about like Henry as like potentially be like having impotence issues. I
love that line.
Yes.
So much.
First of all, I believe there actually like is like some indication that like Anne might have like gossiped about that being a problem, and that like there's a number of people think, like, especially given the fertility issues, that like Henry probably like did have essentially like I think syphilis related impotence.
I'm not surprised, considering yeah, that's not surprising.
Yep. So yeah, so the like comments on his difficulty performing have historical basis.
That's wonderful to learn.
It does mention the fact that it mentions Anne's specific palace at Richmond, which was a palace that she received in her divorce settlement, and also the fact that she goes to court, and which I think is like cool that they do mention, because she did often go to court and was actually officially had precedence over every woman in the kingdom except for whoever Henry's current wife happened to be and his daughters.
She, I mean, without a doubt, had the best outcome of all of them. I mean,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. It's so good.
When I was at Broadway Con, we were my group of friends and I were stopped and like asked by like a kid like cub reporter that was having, I think it was like for a podcast or something, and he was saying like, what queen would you want to trade lives with? And I said Anna of Cleves, and one of my friends was like, she didn't really have like the greatest life afterwards. And I was like, I don't care. I was like, just give me the palace. I was like, that's all I want.
It couldn't have been that bad. She didn't remarry.
Yeah, no, and like, so there actually was this whole thing where like her brother basically, after the execution of Katherine Howard, her brother basically like tried to talk Henry into remarrying Anne, and
no.
like, yeah. And like it's like mostly her brother, and like at least in like my version of events, I'm like there's no way that she was like actually on board with that.
Yeah, no. I mean, best divorce settlement, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, like absolutely. Like I think she definitely won, and she actually is also the one who lived longest of Henry's wives, because she did outlive Katherine Parr.
Oh, well, she did, yeah.
Yeah. Katherine Parr, by the way, was in fact a writer, and one of the cool things is that like she actually has like there's like a cool fact about her that like I think the song kind of like hints at but doesn't explicitly say, which is that she actually wrote the first book published in English written by a woman and like published under her own name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Katherine Parr's great. She's just so awesome.
Yeah, no, and she is very cool. Less awesome. Urine, albeit often animal urine, not one's own urine, was indeed used as a hair lightener, and makeup did definitely regularly contain lead.
Yeah.
Both of which are referenced.
Yeah, arsenic was a big deal too. Like, people have said that because we don't really know what killed Jane Austen, that's been said that like it may have been arsenic. I don't know if they've figured out if it was like cosmetic use or it was like medicinal purposes, but I know that like her body that we've been able to test like has tested positive for arsenic, and it's like we don't know if that's what killed her. It's like really like horrifying when you think about it.
Yeah. Ugh. So then there's definitely a couple of things that like I just like wish that they had mentioned. So they have the like bit that like daughters are so easy to forget, where they kind of reference Mary. But the other daughter who then is like super forgotten is Elizabeth, Anne's daughter, who like is a very long reigning Queen of England.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not much about Elizabeth at all.
I don't think she's ever mentioned.
No, I don't even know if Anne ever mentions that she has a kid.
I don't think so, because I actually like remember noticing this, so that like Jane keeps being like, my poor child, and then Anne's response is always like, my poor head, which is fair.
I do feel like there is one point where it was like, I do want to say there is a throwaway line where she's like, I also went through childbirth. Like, it was something, but it was like, but I also lost my head. Like, it's kind of like a really quick throwaway of like, your woe is me is that it's childbirth, but like I did that and also lost my head kind of thing. But you're right. Like, for someone whose daughter becomes almost as infamous as, if not even more so than her father, like, there's nothing.
Yeah, and also that, like, that is also, like, a sad aspect of Anne's story, is that, like, in her, like, when she was executed, she did, like, leave behind, like, a 3-year-old child.
Yeah.
Who, like, you know, I mean, also had, like, a very complicated life in terms of that, like, her father kept, like, going back and forth on whether she was legitimate or not, and treated her better than others in some moments, given, basically depending on what the kind of, like, political currents were. So there are definitely, like, I think she's definitely, like, a figure that is kind of sad that she wasn't mentioned, but on the other hand, I get why they didn't want to, like, make the story about her.
Yeah. It didn't fit with Anne's song at all, but, yeah, both Mary and Elizabeth are kind of forgotten after Mary's mentioned once or twice.
Yeah, and especially, like, Anne very much in terms of how she is presented is not giving off, like, mom vibes.
No, not at all. No.
Stereotypically at least, and so like I think that's definitely part of it. That is just like not the story that they want to tell about Anne, but it is especially like given how important the future Queen Elizabeth was, it was like a sort of weird thing that was missing. I also kind of wish that they'd mentioned that Anne Boleyn and Katherine Howard are cousins.
Yeah, especially because like the way that Katherine Howard is introduced is kind of like, who is she again? Which Katherine is she? Because, you know, there's the Katherine that survived and the Katherine that was first dethroned. And it's, you know, any kind of mention. I don't know. It seeing it in your notes, yeah, I agree. It's something that I knew, so I just never thought about it. But you're right. Yeah, it's weird. This is all one and big incestuous family.
I know. It's like so incestuous. Especially also because essentially by like oversimplification. Like, so my big person that I hate in this historical period, I mean, obviously Henry, but everybody hates Henry. I also really, really hate Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk, who is uncle to both Anne and Catherine. And the fact that, like, he obviously knew what happened to Anne and then is like, hey, cool, I've got a great idea. I'm gonna, like, trot out some other, like, nieces for Henry to, like, fuck and maybe marry, and then who knows what'll happen to them, whatever, I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I mean, like, every portrayal of him is of doing that even while Anne is still alive and, like, hasn't quite lost favor. He's still already looking which niece, daughter, whatever can I put in next.
Yeah, when you say that, it makes me remember, like I said earlier, I know the other Boleyn girl from when I was like 13 or 14. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, he was that like garbage person in like a story that's like, mostly about garbage people. But
right. Yeah, no, he is very intensely a garbage person, and I hate him. And he's also somebody who, like, one of the, like, great injustices of history is that, like, he never got executed. He was actually, like, about to, and then Henry died. And then Edward sort of forgot about him, and then Mary pardoned him because they're, like, Catholic buddies at that point.
Of course. Such a slime ball.
Like, he got to, like, fucking die in his bed, which makes me really angry. In terms of also other incestuous facts, Katherine Parr's love interest and husband after Henry's death is Jane Seymour's brother. Which is like a just like
she had a
weird
kid with him
detail.
Too, right? That's how she died, I think. She had a kid with him too.
Yeah, I believe she did die in childbirth. With her marriage to Thomas Seymour, who also like potentially might have like molested the young Princess Elizabeth. So like he actually is not such a fucking prize. Yeah, there's at least like rumors. It's not quite certain like what definitively happened, but like there is a, I think, arguable case to be made that he molested or tried to molest Elizabeth, who would have been like in her teens.
I mean, it's just, there's no way it's not true, even if it's like,
right.
I was about to say, not as bad as it sounds. I mean, God, women were so treated so bad, so awful.
And still are.
Oh, I mean, yes.
But yeah, so that's like, it's like, you know, he like seems like so, I guess like, he's like so much of a non-person, but also seems so nice, but then it's like, he actually is not so great though. Yeah. And also like creates this like weird connection between her and Jane Seymour, which like also does not come up. And then finally on Katherine, it also doesn't mention that she came within inches of being arrested and executed for heresy, because she was much more Protestant leaning than Henry was. And they kept like arguing about religion, and she basically got out of it by basically saying that like she was like basically playing devil's advocate to entertain him, and she didn't really believe the things that she said, which she definitely did.
I love her so much.
I was gonna say, I love
she's
that.
Great. But it's also like, it's definitely an aspect of her story that like to some extent there's like the cheery aspect that like she's the one who survived, but like she came relatively close to like not surviving potentially.
She was also in court. I mean, she was a lady in waiting for Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. I don't know if she was for Anne Boleyn, but I mean, she was around. She's always portrayed as such an older woman. I mean, she was, I think, maybe barely in her 30s when they married, and he was in his 50s. So it's like, you know, it's always a weird portrayal in movies and TV shows when it comes to Katherine of Parr, because everybody else was so much younger. But like, she was around and saw all this. It's a lot.
I mean, because one of the things that I think often gets kind of lost in some of the portrayals is that, I mean, Henry had a long reign, but his, like, episode of, like, toggling between wives is actually a relatively short part. So Anne Boleyn died in 1536. Henry died in 1547. His last 4 wives were all within a period of only 11 years. Oof. So, like, he was married to Catherine for a very long time and to Anne Boleyn for 3 years, and, like, it then kept, like basically just, like, kept, like, a lot of the, like, most of the ones after that were, like, very brief.
Do we know why? I mean, after he had the heir and son, like, why I mean, other than just he wanted to be married, but was it I can't imagine it was a law or a requirement or something, like, if Elizabeth got away with it.
I think he basically wanted, like, insurance on the whole son thing. because
That's fair.
Edward was actually, like, never super healthy.
That's true.
And he did, in fact, like, die relatively young, and, like, that was not
Yeah.
shocking to people, I don't think, especially. And so I think, like, he wanted to, like, not be in the situation that he ultimately was in, where, like, there was a very good chance that his daughters would be, in fact, the ones who would inherit him. I mean, in fact, all of his children, all of his legitimate children at some point reigned. And so I think he basically wanted, like, more sons who would have, like, come second to Edward, but, like, who would have been, like, an option to have. There are also just, like, a couple of other, like, things. So I will say, like, most of the inaccuracies, I think, are pretty deliberate. We've already kind of talked a little bit about the, like, somewhat of an if issues with Anne's portrayal. I think Katherine Howard's portrayal, while I do think it's super powerful, I think casting her last relationship as being, like, questionably consensual, I think that's really the one where I think you could least make that argument. You have, like, love letter. I mean, you know, obviously, like, you don't know. She is 17, like, by that standards, it, like, certainly was statutory rape. But, like, there's really, like, a lot of indications that, like, she very much thought of herself as being in love with him. And so, like, it's like a little weird that, like, it makes that decision. Like, I'm not sure if I agree with like that aspect of the overall portrayal. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that bent might probably come more from, like I said, I think they're pretty on record as saying that they only read, like, one book before they wrote it. But, like, so it could just be that they went with, like, one person's interpretation, or it's just that they said, like, oh, we really need to make this fit the theme, like, what do we do? So, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, you don't want to, like, smear somebody who, like, might not deserve it, like, as far as we know, so it's like, tricky.
All the line back then, let's be honest, there was not,
there are no good men.
Not in court. Not in court. No.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. I mean, like, ultimately, I am fine with, like, the yes, all men argument for, like, Tudor England, but...
I feel like we just need to make, like, we need to put, like, Henry VIII's face and just put, like, yes, all men on, like, Henry VIII's face.
Well, I mean, like, Henry was, I mean, even outside of the wives, Henry was a terrible person, like, the things that he did.
Yeah.
But just to become a member of court, like... I mean, you can see it in the fact that, like, how these wives were presented and everything. Like, nobody is innocent, or they're, like, quote unquote, because they were born in. Even if you were quote unquote born into it, like, you still had to find your way, or then, you know, nobody's innocent. So even, like, if it was consensual, she was a fucking child, first of all. But I don't know. It's like I agree, like, that it was probably. It is a little weird that it is portrayed as being creepier in the song than it may have been. But also, fuck it, I don't care. Everybody in court was terrible. I don't.
Yeah. I think for me, it's just, like, that it, like, seems a little weird that, like, ultimately it kind of, like, presents as creepier, that relationship, than the relationship that she had with, like, that dude when he was in his 30s and she was 13. And he was her music instructor. That, like, that relationship, she's, like, it, like, presents as, like, her being, like, more on board with that. And that is, like, not being constructed as abuse, but this other relationship being constructed as abuse. And so, like, I don't know, I feel like they're kind of, like, making a decision to, like, have it be very linear in terms of her, like, journey in a way that I'm not sure makes sense, I guess. I don't know.
I get that. Yeah.
Like, I think there's, like, a linearity to it where, like, in her own experience, I have a feeling that, like, Thomas Culpeper was probably a basically, like, wow, this guy is much better than the person that I'm married to, who is disgusting and terrible, and I hate him.
Yes. Yeah, Henry, not a good person. So much yelling.
Yeah. Finally, I do just want to make one note about the fashion stuff, which is that the things that are brought up in the House of Holbein song fashion-wise are actually a tiny bit later. Corsets are actually a little bit later into the 16th century when they first start becoming somewhat popularized, and are really, like, the corsets that are the most kind of well-known for being, like, tied in such a way that they are really endangering women's health and, like, fucking with their bones. Those are really, like, the 19th century.
Right.
So they do kind of, like, put that, like, backwards a little bit. And also high heels are not popular in Europe until the 17th century, and were at the time, for the first, like, century or so of being around, mostly worn by men, which is a cool fashion fact that I think should be better known, that high heels are, like, not originally, like, a women's thing.
Yeah, now I want to go research why that switch happened.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, so there's like all these portraits of like Louis XIV like wearing high heels.
Yeah.
One of my
Which is
favorite
cool, yeah.
quotes from Frasier is that there's a point where Roz says to Niles, she's like, you won't even consider like buying a piece of furniture, and she says like, unless some fey French aristocrat is like sat as fat satin fanny in it. And Niles looks at her and he goes, Louis XIV was not fey. Everyone wore garters in the 18th century. So.
And you'll be fine. We'll turn 6 fear into a 9. So just say yeah and don't say nine. Cause now you're in the house. In the house of hold by yeah. Oh yeah. Das ist gut, oh yeah. Yeah. The house of hold by.
Those are mostly kind of facts and quibbles that I wanted to mention. I usually have a segment, Historia et Veritas, where I talk about a like particular figure or event or phenomenon. It seems like it's like not entirely in the spirit of all of this to like just like pick one of the wives, and there's not really time to like talk about the real histories of all 6 of them in a lot of detail. So in lieu of that, I won't say favorite because we're not supposed to use the word favorite according to this musical, but I will just like ask everybody to say, based on the musical or other knowledge or some combination of the two, whether there was a particular individual that you most identified with or found intriguing or inspiring.
I said it earlier and I'll say it again. I mean, Katherine Parr, because of this, I completely cannot wait to figure out more about her and identify probably the most with her just because of this musical alone.
Yeah, I think for me it was definitely Anna of Cleves, just because, like I said before, just the way that her song really deals with, you know, body image and sort of like saying a fuck you to like male expectations of that. I think for me what struck me about it was just that I didn't really know about her before the song, and just like the way that it took on those issues like really resonated with me right away and made me be like, you know, identifying with that was like a really new experience for me in that way. And it was just like immediately I just wanted to know like so much more about her, for her being somebody that like I definitely wouldn't have known anything about her if you had asked me before I had listened to the song.
Yeah, I definitely like kind of hinted at this also, but yeah, for me it is also Anna of Cleves, and you know, especially like she's somebody that I've always had a fondness for, is given the like historical novel thing. I also like remember on multiple occasions going like very out of my way to like make sure to find her portrait, which actually now hangs in the Louvre in Paris for reasons that I'm actually not quite sure what led to that particular journey of the painting. But yeah, but then especially like as I was saying before, like watching this as somebody who's gone through a divorce and on the other side is much, much happier, having this as this kind of like anthem for like how great divorce is like very powerful for me in this moment.
You said that I tricked you, 'cause I didn't look like my profile picture too bad I don't agree. So I'm gonna hang it up for everyone to see, and you can't stop me, 'cause I'm the queen of the castle. Get down, you dirty rascal. Get down. Get down. Get down, you dirty rascal. Get down. Get down. 'Cause I'm the queen of the castle.
So usually for the next section, I invite the guests and myself to come up with if they have an alternative movie or story that they would like to tell inspired by this one.
I think for me, I think I notice it especially now that this is on Broadway, like there are so many like modern versions out there, especially for young adult literature.
Yeah.
I've noticed there's definitely like 4 or 5 right now, but and I see them, but I think the one that I'm most interested in that is basically probably what I would want to see done anyway is I think you talked to someone in one of the groups about it, is Wife After Wife by I think Olivia Hayward. where I haven't read it yet, but I know that it sort of brings the story into a modern context and also sort of tries to examine like Me Too through the lens of like these different women's experiences and sort of like what the reckoning for someone like Henry would be like today. And I know that you guys were discussing how it's sort of like can't fully do it because without just making Henry like a murderer today, which you can't really do. But like, so there's things that are like complicated about that. But I think in general, just the framework of looking again at like the things that these historical figures did and applying modern day movements like Me Too, like I think that's like the sort of thing that I would do with the story, like if I were to do it and people are doing it anyway and I don't have to do anything. So
yeah.
How do you modernize this into a YA book without killing people?
Yeah, the one that I was referring to is adult fiction, but I think some of the YA ones I've seen, it's just like a boy that has a lot of ex-girlfriends, and it's like it doesn't really quite work in the same way.
Yeah, that doesn't quite.
Yeah, it doesn't have like the same weight to it, but that's kind of what they do.
But you know that
right,
that would
like
be a
it's
lot
not quite
of
the
fun
same when like you
here.
murdered at
now
like
I'm like,
2.
how can I do this?
I'll definitely find some of the ones that I'm thinking of and send them on and maybe like post them in the group when this goes up, because I know that there's like 4 or 5 and I keep noticing them whenever they pop up now.
It's not something that I've ever been on the lookout for, and now I'm kind of like, that is something now I'm curious about. I don't know. How do you modernize this and without killing people?
Yeah.
Without it turning into like a Bluebeard situation.
Yeah.
Right. Which like, yeah, because that's the thing is that like without kingship, I mean, without kingship, I don't know how you get around the fact that like this man should be in prison.
Yeah.
Unless you don't kill people, but then like, I mean, but then like to what extent are you telling even like a version of the same story? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's like, especially now, like with the Me Too framework, like I feel like now we can sort of tell that story, like especially when you look at someone like unfortunately Harvey Weinstein that like took forever to have like action taken. But yeah, it's like the murder thing in particular is like a thing that's like a hard hurdle for like a modernization to overcome.
I guess you could do something like where, okay, this is off the cuff. Let me see if I can do this. Okay. So first girlfriend is the one that got through 2 years of high school, maybe 3 years. Maybe we'll go up to senior year. And it's one of those like weird breakups. And then you have Anne Boleyn, the Anne Boleyn stand-in. And then you just completely destroy her reputation. So that way you're not killing her, but she doesn't get out of this. And then Jane Seymour is the character where he starts to date. He realizes like this is the one, and she moves away or something. Then Anna of Cleves is definitely a blind date that doesn't go well. Katherine Howard is another situation where you just completely destroy her reputation. And then Katherine Parr is the one that you find out did it to destroy his reputation. There, it did it.
Oh,
I feel like the Katherine Howard
that.
thing
Yeah,
would maybe like Katherine Howard in a modern like teenage context. I feel like that would maybe be a good way to explore. Like, there was a lot of debate a few years ago. I feel like I keep bringing up like cultural events into this, but there was that debate a few years ago about that piece that woman wrote about Aziz Ansari, I think, and like they clearly like viewed the situation differently. And it was like, you know, a lot of people were coming to his defense and being like, well, he's not a mind reader, like how could he know that like she thought that like it went bad or like it wasn't consensual. And I feel like especially with teenagers, like there's a lot of room to explore that because like these might be like their first sexual situations. So I feel like that would be a thing that you could introduce in a YA context, but it would also like, if you're putting it in a story where there's like 6 women, it also wouldn't have the time to like explore that in a way that it should be explored. So I feel like that would probably be like the only wrinkle with something like that.
I totally want to write this now because like Anne Boleyn is the one that keeps flirting with him and is like she breaks up the long relationship, and then he ruins her reputation. That's how that ends. And then Jane Seymour, I'm gonna stick with the whole like they fall in love, like that is the summer romance, and then she finds out that she's got to go do senior year somewhere else. And then Anna of Cleves is the blind date to get him over it. like they're like he's being all mopey and stuff, and his friends are like, dude, let's just do this. And then Katherine Howard is the younger one, where he's like, oh, I've kind of like maybe fucked it up with my entire class. I'm gonna try to date someone much younger.
Yeah.
And then destroy that poor girl's reputation. Oh God, Katherine Howard would be a hard one to write. And then Katherine Parr is like the one that they all hire behind his back to like come in and be like John Tucker must die. It's like that. But instead of falling for him, she does actually destroy his reputation. Okay. I now want to write this book.
Yes. Because that works. Because also I feel like the thing that's actually hardest in the modernization narratives is explaining why Katherine Parr would marry or date him.
Yes. Which was why she's got to be someone who, quote unquote, comes out from out of town. Yeah.
Yeah. But it also works better when, like, you're doing it in a context where you're doing, like, a dating as opposed to marriage, because that's, like, really taking the con a little bit far.
Yes.
If you actually marry him.
I think it would work well as, like, I read an adaptation of, oh, God, what book was that? Fuck. Now I'm sorry, I gotta look it up. But it was, I really, really like adaptations and modernizations of things, like, I'm sorry, Tracy, but I prefer modernizations and adaptations of Jane Austen over the actual source material. For the most part.
Believe me, I think that kind of thing is like fascinating. So don't worry.
I think it's really interesting to see like how they do those modernizations and what works.
Yeah. The only like Jane Austen that I really love is Northanger Abbey, and like that one is like the hardest one to modernize for some strange reason.
Yeah, people have tried really hard to do. There's been like 2 or 3 that have been like, she loves Twilight, and it's like, okay, like we've all tried that. It hasn't worked very well. Like we need to find something different.
No. Like that is my white whale. That is what I'm going to do someday. I'm going to adapt that book, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And so I got sent an adaptation recently that I was really excited for. Here it is. I want to say it's Macbeth, like Lady Macbeth. Yeah, it's like a Macbeth thing that was really hard. So like adapting for teens is just, you gotta walk that line.
Yeah.
And you can't kill, I don't know. You can't kill people.
I feel like you can only kill in like certain contexts.
Yeah.
Like if you have like car accidents or like something, but like.
That's the thing is like if he has girlfriends who mysteriously, like once you have 2 of those, that starts to be a problem.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't have, like, some normal person who dates or marries a person who had, like, 2 girlfriends that you are, like, suspected of having murdered.
Yeah. Like, mysterious accidental deaths. I'm sorry, if you've dated more than one of those and they died while you were dating them, that's a no.
Yeah, no, like, that's...
My friend and I have watched a lot of, like, they're like the sort of like older style like teen dramas, like early 2000s, like One Tree Hill, like the OC, the things like those. Like one of the things we talk about a lot is like the problem you run into is like you sort of like run out of like high stakes scenarios that you can do with teenagers, so then you start putting teenagers in like really adult situations. And it's just like, and then like you sort of deal with it as a teenage viewer, but then when you're like our age and you're like, you know, in your late 20s, you're watching this and you're like, no, like teenagers should not be dealing with this. Like it's painful. And so like that's the one thing I feel like you run into with modernizations. It's like, no, you're putting them in dramas with like serial killers. It's like, don't do this.
Just watch Riverdale. That's all.
Right.
Oh God, yeah.
I had a period of my life where I watched Gossip Girl, and that's also very much like, oh my God, like they're like these are children.
I love
like,
they're
should not be in
like,
this situation.
like trading each other like sexually. It's like, don't do this.
Right.
Oh, he traded his girlfriend for his hotel. Oh, God, I love that show. It's such trash.
No.
Such trash.
It is. It's that kind of like delightful trash.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely just like, I totally want to like go back and do my like Anne of Cleves historical novel.
Please do.
Especially also because like, I mean, we like hear the stories all the time about like Anne's relationships with like Katherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour, but like we don't hear as much about the fact that like Anne of Cleves knew and like had relationships with Katherine Howard and Katherine Parr, as well as both Mary and Elizabeth. And I think there's like really interesting stories there. Also inspired by the like real life, stuff of like real, experiences of Genesis Linnea, the actress playing her. I like kind of want to do a queer storyline for this like woman who is like, yeah, no, I'm never gonna remarry and just like chill in my castle though. I think that would be fun.
I'm definitely not opening my notebook to start sketching out notes for this. I'm definitely not. That's not what you see me doing at all.
I expect the podcast to get a shout out in your acknowledgments when you write and publish this.
I was going to say,
yes.
It's like, this is like the inspiration.
Hell yes. Okay.
Tell me what you need, what you want, you don't need to plead. 'Cause I feel the chemistry, like I get you and you get me. And maybe this is it. He just cares so much, it feels legit. We have a connection. I think this guy is different. 'Cause all you wanna do, baby, is touch me, love me, can't get enough. See, all you wanna do, baby, is please me, squeeze me, birds and the bees me. Run your fingers through my hair, tell me I'm the fairest of the fair. Playtime's over, the only thing you wanna do is...
I usually kind of wind up by having us all rate this on a scale from 1 to 5 based on whatever criteria we see fit. I'm going to go ahead and just say a 5. I adore this.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. It is definitely something that I think you should listen to, if, especially, again, you grew up in like the 90s, 2000 pop era.
Yeah.
It is the same kind of vibe, and it is so good. And then actually seeing it on stage. I mean, like Tracy, I live in New York City, and I just don't go to a ton of shows because I don't particularly love crowds. And I got to be honest, like, I can find $50 to use for something else.
Yeah.
So I only usually go when
Right.
someone is in town to go with me. And this is one that I went and saw on my own, even when, like, I, asked if some people wanted to go with me, and I was like, fuck it. I really wanted to see this, and I'm so glad that I did.
Yeah, I'm really there too. I think, like, even not having seen it just yet, I think it's really, like, it's just, like, I think, like, seeing the broad reach that it has, especially, like, with the teenagers and 20-somethings, that, like, there are certain musicals, like, that make people interested in things that, like, you don't see people of that age group always typically being interested in. Like, one of my big musicals that I was a really big fan of when it was around was Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which is this sort of, like, electro, like, pop musical of this, like, really small, like, 70-page portion of War and Peace. And, like, you would see this, like, 20-something, 30-something fandom of, like, this tiny musical based on War and Peace. And that was just, like, it showed you, and it showed me, there was something in War and Peace that I always thought of this, like, hyper-masculine book about war, that, like, there was something that was relatable and interesting to me in War and Peace. And I think that this really, does that with the story of Henry VIII, and it takes them, beyond that rhyme that we all know, and it really shows, like, the human things in their story that we can relate to, and that we can even still relate to today, when you wouldn't really necessarily think that's the case. And I think that's, like, the really special thing about it. And, it's not as elaborate as Hamilton. It's, like I said earlier, I don't think it's even really trying to be that. It just wants to be fun, and I think to get people interested. And I think that's, really, it's, like, it's gift and it's magic, and I think that, people should definitely give it a try, and I think they would, really enjoy it, even if they're, like, iffy on it at first.
Yeah, and, not that, like, I want to plug Amazon, but I know, like, Amazon definitely, like, you can listen to it for free. I'm pretty sure if you have a Prime account. I'm not sure if it's, like, on Spotify, too, but there are definitely, I think, like, ways to, like, listen to it for free before, like, committing, but also, like, this soundtrack is not very expensive.
It's definitely on Spotify, because I think that was where I listened to it before I bought it, like, the MP3, and it's, and I'm sure that it's probably, doing really well on Spotify. That's a place where a lot of teenagers in particular are listening to, like, show tunes and Broadway albums. They make, like, probably pretty big business in that on the Broadway industry.
Yeah.
So
I definitely highly recommend that people check out the soundtrack of this, even though you will not be able to see it on Broadway, imminently, at least.
But if somehow I had that choice, no holding back, I'd raise my voice. I'd say, Henry, yeah, it's true, I'll never belong to you, 'cause I am not your toy. to enjoy till there's something new. As if I'm gonna give up my boy, my work, my dreams to care for you. Don't even get a clue, there's nothing you can do. I don't need your love, no, no. No, I don't need your love, no, no. There's nothing left to discuss, no, no. But I don't need your love, no, no.
Are there places where the listeners could find you on the internet? Megan, do you want to go first? I know there are many of them.
Sure. I co-host 2 podcasts, primarily Judging Book Covers and Mine's Eat Yerk, but the easiest way to kind of find out any information about me is to go to my blog, which is Meg Griffin with 3 G's. So it's meggriffin.com, and every podcast that I've guested on, plus all the podcasts that I have co-host, are all there, as well as samples of my writing, my crocheting, and book reviews when I can mentally get to that point after all of this quarantine. So
Same.
Yeah. Tracy, what about you?
I'm mostly like an itinerant like podcast guest. I don't have like a podcast of my own, but I've been on like so many. People like look at me, they're like, "Don't you like have one of your own?" I'm like, "No, I just guest on other people's." And I'm a Trey all day on Instagram, which is TRAI day, and have loved on Twitter, one word, and those are mainly my social medias where people can find me if they're interested.
All right. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts, and I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval and join our Facebook group. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. If you have any questions or suggestions, I'd love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much, Megan and Tracy, for joining me to talk about this awesome musical.
no, thank you for having us on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad to, talk about it and sort of maybe like get more people interested in it, because I really think it, deserves that following, and people, might not necessarily have heard about it yet, especially with the shutdown going on. So I'm glad to spread the gospel.
Definitely. All right. So yeah, thank you all again, and thanks for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
We're one of a kind, no category. Too many years lost in history. We're free to take our crowning glory for 5 more minutes. We're 6. Whoa, whoa, we're 6. Whoa, we're 6. Whoa, whoa, for 5 more minutes. It's the end of the show, of the history mix. We switched up the flow and we changed the prefix. Everybody knows that we used to be six wives. But we wanna say before we drop the curtain, nothing is for sure, nothing is for certain. All that we know is that we used to be six wives.